Welcome. Hello. Furthermore, I actually grew up in San Jose in Almaden Valley. So I'm very much a Silicon Valley native. And so in some ways, this talk is about like what I've been doing since I left the Bay Area, Silicon Valley native, California optimist goes to the big city, and what's happened since. And so I moved to New York City in 2018, very much to join Cornell Tech. So this picture here is like a digital rendering of the Cornell Tech campus. That long, tall rectangle is actually the high rise that the student faculty live in. I live on the 25th floor of that. The little buildings at the base of that are actually the research, and office buildings for Cornell Tech, and that's where I work when I'm not on sabbatical, which I am this year. I avoid all these places except the cafe. It's actually the Queensboro Bridge there in the backdrop. For oldsters, people who like things, that's actually the bridge that the Simon Garfunkel's Feeling Groovy is about. It's a groovy place. Queensboro Bridge actually doesn't stop on Roosevelt Island. It flies over. That island is in the middle of the East River between Manhattan and Queens. Officially, it's part of Manhattan, but it's a little bit isolated. And Cornell Tech is a graduate school and research center for Cornell University, which is, up in Ithaca, closer to Niagara Falls. This was established after winning this competition to build an applied science campus on the island. And I say this not to gloat, because when Cornell won this competition over Stanford, I was a member of Stanford. It was a friends of mine that were there standing on the hills imagining what Stanford could be there. And so it's funny that I'm there now. But the mission of the campus is to emphasize applying technology to real-world challenges, engaging with external partners. The competition to have the campus was in large part spurred by the 2008 recession, when Bloomberg realized there needed to be just a lot more diversification of the economy in New York City. And now New York City is second to some other place in the world for startups and new ventures and technology. So this campus is a small part of that, but it's exciting to be there. So I'm going to tell you guys about 3 lines of research from my current research program that fit underneath the theme of urban interaction. These are not finished projects. These are one of the lovely things about being an associate professor is you can start projects that don't have a clear end and just do them because you think they're exciting. And so I'm very much grabbing the reins for that. And some of these things they're really long threads, and some of them go all the way back to my days at Stanford. So I'm quite excited to tell you about them. So I'm just going to tell you at the forefront, I'm going to tell you about Trashbots in the city, urban fingerprinting, and then communal extended reality. So leading off, I'm going to show you this video, which is from work that we did in 2014, 2015 at Stanford. And I don't even know if some of these places still exist, but let's see. Maybe you'll recognize them. So these are the results of what we call phenomenological experiments. We basically wanted to understand how people are going to interact with robots in the future, when we can imagine they might be running around. And we could ask people, we could just make things and voice them on people. But I think one of the things that is really interesting about interaction is that it's like a dialogue. You really can't author a dialogue by yourself. What you say influences what the next person says, influences what you are going to say. And so you can really only understand these things in a context where you are interacting with the people you're planning to interact with. So we run these experiments in part to underline a point that Cliff Nass used to make, which is that people interact socially, with computers. And like a lot of people in the human-robot interaction space use this as a reason to justify why we have to make everything have eyes and hands, because people are expecting to interact socially. And one of the things that we are trying to point out is that people interact socially regardless of what the machine looks like. And so our robot doesn't look anything like anything else except just normal brute trash barrel, but you can see people doing all sorts of social interactions. And I think some of the things that we've shown here have been replicated other places, but some of the things that really jump out to me is how much interaction, pre-interaction goes into interaction. Like people are negotiating, we're not gonna interact because we don't have any garbage. So there's like, they're interacting to say we're not gonna interact, and they're explaining what the preconditions for interaction would have been. That's fascinating. I don't know a single robot that's actually looking for those signs, but it's actually really, really important. Another thing is about the mental model people have for the robot. We laughed ourselves silly when we found that clip of that kid trying to bait the garbage can across the floor to where he wanted to go with garbage. Because the mental model there is like the garbage can wants to eat the garbage, right? We're like, that kid's amazing, we should have given him money. But then, as we started to look at this other footage, we're like, that's actually implicitly in a lot of the other things that people are doing. They think they can make the robot do things or not do things by moving the garbage around. And this is a great example of mental models. Like everyone can see that that's a garbage can, it doesn't have a, digestive system, it has no desire to eat, but then we don't do anything to tell people how to interact with the robot. But the number of times that people obviously use a model where the garbage can has a desire to eat garbage is really astonishing. And one of the things I love is what's going on is that we have permission to run the experiment. We only use the footage from people who give us permission to use it, and we do a post-interview. And sometimes the people who are remotely operating the trash barrel don't see people who are doing things like basically throwing the garbage over the shoulder of the garbage can. And when we interview those people, they're angry, because they gave the garbage can something and they weren't acknowledged. So, H model, human model for interaction. Someone comes and takes your garbage, you thank them. Here, people expect to be thanked. So the interaction model is a social interaction model, but not a human social interaction model. And I think that's super fascinating. And this is the sort of thing that you can't learn without actually being in the space and trying things out. So going to New York, one of the things we wanted to understand is it the same? In the city, across the world, it turns out later on, 8 years later, let's see.
And we made 2 robots to separate landfill and recycling. Our study area is constrained within the trapezium-shaped traffic island called Astor Place in Manhattan, New York City. The space is set up with several metal tables and chairs for public seating. We used a Wizard of Oz deployment method to elicit natural interaction behaviors from people who perceive our robots to be autonomous.
Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Yeah. There's trash here. Yes. Yes. Oh, good boy. Oh, there you go. Oh, good boy. All that's recycling. Oh, you're a bad boy. You don't know what you're doing. Yeah. It's okay. They're learning. So they're still pups.
And then I realized they're buddies. Yeah. And they're to do their job. So people can call. I guess it knows I've been sitting here long enough. I should give it something. Okay. Come here, buddy. Thank you. Good job. That's creepy. That's just freaking creepy.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you.
So you know it's New York.
It's the cup, bro.
I'll give him a straw.
Okay. I don't know, like this makes you believe in social science. We're getting a lot of the same kinds of behaviors 8 years, later, a whole nation away, and you can see people still think that the robots is eating garbage. They still talk to it like it's a dog. They say things like it's learning. Huge assumption for a machine that you see in public. It's learning. They're still learning. And this idea that you could train them and say things to them like, we're not building machines that are picking up on these signals, but people clearly expect that. Like, de novo. So it's really cool. One other interesting things about doing these kinds of field experiments in the wild is you just don't control, so much of the environment. Like one thing that we get as questions from reviewers is, how do you keep repeat interactions from happening? It's like, we can't, and sometimes we do get people that see it again, or like, you can see successive things. And we also don't control like social media. So a lot of people end up finding out about something that's happening like as we're doing the experiments, and they come explicitly to find the robots. Here is something that someone sent me, Tiffany Sang, a friend of mine. She found this TikTok video, and this is so amazing because we would never have learned any of the things that were captured by this video if it wasn't for this. This says, Eric Adams, who is the mayor, for now it's still the mayor of New York City, doing the most with the NYC sanitation budget. Okay. So one thing that is really interesting is nobody ever asks us when we are doing the post-interview, how does that robot work? This is the thing we're so proud of, how the robot works, how we're remotely controlling it. It's like recycled hoverboards underneath that we have managed to like hack. So we do that. No one cares about that. A lot of people ask actually, where does the video footage go? Like, how does it get retained? Who uses it? And like, this is, I think, a really interesting post-George Floyd thing. Like, no one used to ask us about these things before, but now people are very conscious of it. And it's a nice conversation, actually, to have with the public. But the thing that we get asked the most is, whose robot is it? Because that's, for them, quite important to thinking about how they want to interact with the robot. It's not the robot there. They understand the robot is an agent of someone. Who? Mayor Eric Adams, and why is it there? It's the sanitation budget. And like, of course in Manhattan, they have robot trash barrels. And the comments to this TikTok video were just so illuminating, like issues that we never thought of kind of being raised. So this one says, yeah, like now deploy it to all the boroughs. And then someone says, I agree. I was being sarcastic, but it's a waste of money, especially when New York City has crime going on. And then other people is like, it wouldn't work in the Bronx. And someone says, there's so many neighbors in the Bronx in need of cleanup, and this is what we get. And so I will say that for us, this was like a real inspiration. Yeah, okay, I thought it was such a big deal just to be in the real city with real, passersby, not just a bunch of Stanford students. That's not real people. We are like, there in the middle of Manhattan, but actually, yeah, every one of the neighborhoods in the Bronx has its own character. What is that? We have not managed to get a foothold in the Bronx yet, but last summer we were able to do a deployment. Oh, sorry, I don't know which. Yeah, so this is the comments that people are making. We managed to do a deployment in downtown Brooklyn. I'm just going to show you a few clips. showing kind of the differences between what's happening at Astor Place, which is in the middle of Manhattan, and Albee Plaza, which is in downtown Brooklyn. This is that negotiating what the preconditions are for interaction. They're trying to explain, like, we have no trash, but also, you know, very Gen Z, like, this one, negotiating another part, kind of this, I'm really excited. I mean, I have a whole deck of people explaining things to robots, you know, and this is another one, someone basically negotiating when the end of the interaction is.
Thank you very much. Come on.
So there's some like difficult paving that's going on. So sometimes the robots get a little stuck, but just like people are like quite nervous when the robot overstays its welcome because they're like, no, we're done. You know? So they're friendly, and then this kind of like stop. And then we saw this earlier, but I think this is like, it's a fun thing to see what it's like from the robot's perspective.
Yes, here we go. Come on, come on. No, wait, yeah, no, I need you. Yeah. Come on. Oh, yeah. There's trash here. Yes. Oh, good boy. Oh, there you. Oh, good boy. Oh, that's recycling. Oh, you're a bad boy. You don't know what you're doing. It's okay. They're learning. They're still pups.
They're still pups. What? So this is Albee Plaza. Whoop. So downtown Brooklyn is a little bit more neighborhoody. People hang out there.
Excuse me, I'm having my ice cream. It is empty. Hello, I'm still having my ice cream. Get away from me. I have no garbage. Hello? Get up.
Okay, so the expectation that this person thinks the robot remembers them, they're continuing the conversation they had before. And then you can hear the annoyance in the voice because they didn't learn the lesson last time. So there's just much more like pointed enunciation of the thing that she wants the robot to understand. I just think is amazing. And that's something that happens when people are expecting repeated interactions. Like this is a space where people see the same people all the time. And we also saw this here.
Controladores. Se llama hierba. Órale, vos.
Oh, ya.
Ay, no vengo a tirar las plantas del muchacho. Ay, va a tirar las plantas. Hola.
Wow, I love it.
Thank you so much.
They're teasing it. They're teasing the trash barrel. Now we're helping to fix it.
Thank you so much, Miss Trash Crabs.
Now it has a nickname.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I will say we were spending a lot of time with different ethnographers, linguists, kind of analyzing the footage that we have here. And we're also trying to set up, other deployments in the other boroughs. I think Queens is next. Bronx is actually still the kind of holy grail. But the high level point is that even very simple machines elicit these very rich interactions. And the thing that is amazing is the way that the interaction is similar, but not the same in different contexts. And as a designer, that's a fascinating thing to think about and try to understand how we're going to grapple with. How do we get enough data that we can understand these like fine-grained distinctions between places? And one thing I think is really interesting is that in some ways you can say we could learn these things from the people. They're constantly signaling to the robots what's expected. This is a little weird, but amazing. And I think this points out something about culture. Culture is self-perpetuating, right? Like this is the metaphor. There's all sorts of people who have an investment in the way things are, and they have, then they take on upon themselves the job of kind of training newcomers to understand the way things are. So this comes off in positive ways as social norm, kind of acculturation, also negative ways, bullying, but it's really interesting that the culture perpetuates differences in ways that are worth understanding, because very often as technologists, the attitude is we will just introduce a thing and then everyone everywhere will adapt. And they just aren't paying attention to the role that culture plays and the incentives that people have for perpetuating culture and really like getting rid of things that don't fit in. And you actually see this in the autonomous car space. So I think as HCI people, low cost, easily replicatable methods and probes and data sharing makes it possible for us to kind of grapple with the breadth and depth, of data that you would actually need to understand these cultural differences. And I will say we're kind of at the beginning phases of this, but we put the plans for our Trash Bro roll-up online. My partner in crime, Barry Brown at Copenhagen University, has had his not technical, HCI students actually replicate the machine and run some experiments in their world. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out is basically how we all share these things in ways that preserve, privacy for all the participants, but allow us to really get at the ways interaction is the same and different in different places. All right, so city is a great place to look at culture is the takeaway theme. Sorry. All right, so the next bit I'm going to talk about is urban fingerprinting, and we'll go basically from the sidewalk level, what just happens when you're sitting around a cafe table, to like this more grand view. Like a lot of times we have this map level view of cities, you can see the geography in a way that as a person we don't get to see. And actually this topic, what I'm calling urban fingerprinting, is the thing that was just presented. So I was general chair of the Automotive UI conference, which just happened Sunday to Wednesday this week here at Paul Brest Hall on the Stanford campus. And this is actually a paper from one of my students, which is from several of my students, called Towards the Instrument of Fingerprinting of Urban Traffic. And it's a way that uses mobile dash cams to kind of get a picture for what we can kind of see going on everywhere in the city, but we can't understand, the whole citywide. Vibes, my Gen Z students call it. This work came out of the pandemic. So during the pandemic, I had a problem where my students, New York City people who like to be around other people, kept sneaking into the lab. So I needed to find a way to get them all to be doing COVID-19 research so that we weren't violating campus policy. We started studying social distancing, and we have a lot of stuff where we have instrumented vehicles that look at how people interacting on the street. And what we proposed, got an NSF rapid grant to look at, was whether people were distancing in public. This is before we knew that in the outdoors you don't need to really be worried about social distancing so much. But as part of this, we were like driving our car around and like taking a lot of videos of and images of what was going around, and then running computer vision on it and like recognizing people, seeing if people were in different kinds of uniforms, and just trying to surmise like where are places people are gathering in the moment in time that we're supposed to be publicly social distancing. As part of this, we learned that there's a lot of these large urban data sets. We were using this program called Mapillary, which got purchased by Facebook/Meta. But we were using that to aggregate our data, so we could, if we had a stream of data, basically the Mapillary would capture all these streams, and then if you made your data open, you can actually share your data with other people who are also putting their dash cam data, bicycle data, pedestrian data up online. We could also we could kind of because our sampling was really opportunistic, it was useful that the New York DOT also has these traffic cameras. We were scraping the traffic cameras quite often so we could get to something closer to ground truth that we could actually use to validate the data that we were collecting. But one of the things that we learned is there's a company called Nexar. They make network dash cameras. They're in a lot of the Ubers, Lyfts, taxi cabs in New York City, and they basically can get the equivalent of Google Street View 8 to 10 times a day. And so we quickly moved from capturing our own data to asking Nexar for data from different points in time to understand what's going on in the city. And by doing large-scale computer vision recognition, we can see different things that are going on in the city. For instance, my PhD student, Matt Franchi, has done this work to kind of train something to recognize police vehicles in these frames. And then here's the classification AUC. And then we can use that to actually see where there are more and less police cars in the city. And this is actually not a totally straightforward thing because we don't actually know what the sampling for these dash cams are, and neither will they tell us because that's kind of their own corporate secret. So we have to do different kinds of things with the data to make sure that we're doing good sampling. And what we can find are things that are not surprising. I mean, these are things that are known, but that there's just many, many more police in the commercial areas than in the residential areas in the city, that there's a lot more police presence in the lowest quartile income neighborhoods than in higher income neighborhoods. And also Black and Hispanic neighborhoods are have far more police presence than the white or Asian community. So this is a really interesting thing. You get a feeling for this when you walk out onto the street, but getting the data is really hard. And it's actually really difficult because you get the data from the very people that you're trying to audit. So being able to have other sidewalk level ways of getting information about what we care about in the city is really interesting. Another thing that we've used this data for is looking at the scaffolds in New York City. So for those of you who don't know, we have this situation where people who live in a building are liable for anyone that gets harmed by stuff falling off the front of the building. And so if you're repairing your building, you have to have scaffolds up. And if you are repairing your building but can't afford to finish, it's better to leave the scaffold up, sometimes for multiple decades, than to take them down. It becomes a blight in and of itself. It creates opportunities for crime and garbage and things like that. So one thing that we were able to do is basically and this is a wonderful intern of ours was able to go through the data set that we have and look to see every place that there is recognizable scaffolding and then compare that to what the New York City Department of Buildings has for permitted scaffolding and find all the unpermitted scaffolding. And that makes it possible for people who are building inspectors, it's actually only a handful of people for a huge city, to figure out where to go and look at, what is the problem here? How can we address that? So that's something that's we have up on archive, still trying to get published. And then one of the things that we were addressing in the work that was presented at AutoUI is how much can we use this method to fingerprint cities? You can't get at ground truth because of the sampling issues, but can we, with this method, actually do enough sampling that we can characterize how one city is like or not like another city? And that tells us something about how much we can take policies, interventions that are introduced in one place and how we might expect it to go in another place. So from that perspective, we also looked at the data that you can get from San Francisco. And you see there's some issues, this is the density of the images that we have in New York City, and it's less in San Francisco, mostly because I think I told you these things are captured from dash cameras that are in these rideshare vehicles, and even though there are many, many rideshare vehicles in San Francisco, it's dwarfed, compared to the number of rideshare vehicles that are instrumented in San Francisco. So it looks like there's a thing that we might be able to do in cities where there's enough cars, this instrumentation. But it also points to something else. We could be having the buses, municipal, fleet vehicles, and other things that are instrumented in this way, and cities could be running their own version of these large urban data sets to get information about what's going on in the city all the time. So the takeaway I want for this thread of research is, it's really challenging to capture the everyday sense of the city at scale. And large urban image data sets give us a way to map urban scale trends while preserving the everyday person's ability to audit the data. Because we get these maps all the time, but do you know if they're true? The fact that you can just look at the picture is kind of amazing. Ground truth is elusive at this scale, and so it's possible to characterize key differences between cities, and I think that is a really interesting endeavor. And we hypothesized these fingerprints can help us to contextualize findings and expectations for generalizability across cities, which has always been something that's been developed urban scale social science. Everything happens, everyone studies New York because they put their data out and nobody knows how much you can take that away. And we think this might be a way that you can actually figure out how much you can transfer stuff. I may just want to emphasize again, we have the anonymized data set available. We're trying to encourage other people to do what we're doing. All right. Last thread of research revolves around communal extended reality. So Michael mentioned we've actually been doing a lot of work looking at how people interact with automated vehicles. That's been a kind of theme of mine. And one of the things that has come from that research is just much more engagement with virtual reality simulation as a tool. I will just say at the forefront, I really don't like using virtual reality as a consumer product. I get ill. I love the physical world. I love being, with all of the grit and the reality of people, and virtual reality doesn't have some of these things, but as a research tool, it's been super amazing. And so what I am really interested in is how people interact with one another and how we get information about how people interact with one another. So I'm just going to say, I think from a classic HCI perspective, if you want to know what people think, you ask them. One of the design in HCI kind of discoveries is that people can't tell you what they don't know. So if you ask them about future scenarios, they'll give you an answer, but you can't trust that answer. So it's useful to show up with a prototype, many prototypes, and get their reactions to those things. So you're just basically bringing a little artifact from the future and getting their reaction to something. So now you have a real reaction to a possible thing. At the city scale, we basically use simulation to prototype scenarios, environments, design interventions in ways that lets the users react naturally. So we joke about it, it's like real reactions to fake situations, And so one of the things that we're really interested in is just this thing that happens every day, but we don't have a lot of data about, which is how people interact just in intersections. And so we built this strange land driving simulator where you can have two people in the same virtual world, each in their own virtual cars, kind of like Mario Kart. But we use that to look at the way that people use the vehicles to communicate who's going to go first, who's going to go second, how those things are the same and different in different places.
Virtual reality headset driving simulation at 2 locations with 170 participants. This study focused on the role of social situational awareness, short essay, of drivers during an encounter culminating in crossing an intersection safely. 2 drivers each drove their own virtual cars in the same virtual world and encountered one another in scenarios of approaching and crossing intersections. Social essay of other drivers' direction of approach to the intersection, signaling, speed and speed change, and heading of the vehicle were measured. Essay scores and models of the encounters reflect sequential perception and understanding of explicit cues such as signaling, and implicit cues with speed change being the strongest one, and expectations of the other driver's actions, all highly related to awareness to who entered the intersection first. We propose implications to driver-to-driver communications and negotiations, and to AV design that is situationally aware to inter-driver social aspects in the encounter.
So, I think at the beginning of this video, we say we present findings, and this is a little bit the paradigm in social science research. We're going to have facts about people, right? I think one of the interesting things about this method that we're using is what we're collecting is these movement patterns, and a lot of times what we get out of this are these movement models that could be used if you were, for example, programming an AV to recognize what the communicative intent of another car's movement is, or how it should move to communicate that it's going to go or it's not going to go. And these are a little bit less findings. It doesn't actually fit the TEDx, here's a strange thing that you didn't know that I'm going to tell you model of research, but I think this is the more valuable and actionable research. And I think for me, I'm actually less excited about this work and more excited about this follow-on work, which looks at how drivers and pedestrians interact. Because the pedestrians outside the car didn't sign up for this future with autonomous vehicles, don't want to have to deal with it, but still the vehicles are there. And it would be great if those vehicles really took into account that way that people move their bodies and signal when they're going to go or not go. So this is actually work that's still in progress. We just demoed it at Auto UI this week. I have a video in the upper left-hand corner showing what's going on in the real-world environment, and then on the upper right, the virtual world, third-party view, and then in the lower left, the driver's perspective, and the lower right, a pedestrian's perspective. And this is a street crossing, what we call a pop-out scenario, where a pedestrian seems to come out from behind a vehicle for the car. And what we hear is what the pedestrian hears in their earpiece.
Please stop.
So the kinds of things that we can get from this, we could basically have these motion capture. We can basically see like when people are gesturing, how they like gaze and look. It's a little bit less cool findings, but like the way that people use their bodies differently in different places. And one of the things that I think is an early thing, you know, like if it's what you know, there are places where people perform not looking, like in New York City, and they kind of move with intentions to like signal to the car they're supposed to stop, and other places where people hang back and wait, and it's much more the norm that you actually try not to signal. You back far enough away that you aren't signaling and you're waiting for the cars to go by to go when it's safe. So these are some of the interesting ways that people negotiate intersections differently. And yes, these things are different across cities, but it's also different from neighborhood to neighborhood and situation to situation. So like looking for all the data that signals when one context is in play versus another is really important. Here's another way that we're using simulation to like look at how people interact. And in this case, we're actually comparing the on-road to in-lab scenarios.
We have designed an on-road driving simulation infrastructure named Portobello that allows drivers or passengers in cars wearing mixed reality headsets to see virtual objects overlaid on top of their real-world view. To date, simulators with this capability have been unable to replicate the types of driving studies typically performed in in-lab simulators. Portobello makes it possible to port studies developed for in-lab simulators to be run on-road, a functionality that we call platform portability. To achieve platform portability, we have applied sensing and localization technologies from robotics and autonomous vehicle research to stage virtual events in the world frame. A LiDAR and IMU are used to localize the vehicle in the world frame, and infrared tracking is used to localize the participant's head movement within the vehicle. To validate our system, we ran the same autonomous vehicle interaction study in both our on-road driving simulator and an in-lab driving simulator, an approach we call twinning of studies. We were able to port our study design, which involved having participants assist an autonomous vehicle in determining when it was safe or not safe to drive when virtual pedestrians were present. With our system, people are able to see virtual avatars exactly where they were programmed in their corresponding location in the real world. The workflow to make platform portable study designs requires mapping of the real-world course environment. We first scan the test area and obtain a high-resolution point cloud map of the environment. The point cloud is then imported into Unity. The in-lab simulation environment can then be built to be a digital twin of the real-world course, and study events can be staged on the map. At runtime, we use our real-time navigation system to locate the vehicle position and update the headset camera location in Unity.
So one of my goals is actually to run one of these pedestrian-driver interaction studies, but actually in the physical environment. So we're still trying to figure out how to make that work. But so I'm showing you all these like driving simulation things that help you think about driving behavior, public behavior. But one of the things I'm most proud of is the way that we've been able to move this towards thinking about how we interact and design the community, and then think about how we do future planning for cities. And this next project, I think, really captures that very well. I should mention this one, best honorable mention at Designing Interactive Systems this last summer.
Extended realities, XR, has been proven as a powerful tool to engage communities in an embodied and intuitive way. Building on what we have developed in the CXR system, a communal extended reality system for situated on-road immersive experiences. In simple words, the CXR system enables a group of people to use virtual reality headsets inside a moving vehicle and watch the exact same route in a virtual digital twin. The virtual world is geolocated and progresses in sync with the physical world. In our case, we used it to simulate flood and climate change scenarios, but we believe it could have many other implications. In this paper, we describe our advances in modeling of the digital twin and our technical development and setup of the CXR system on a moving bus. The Roosevelt Island digital twin is created based on the open data of New York City Department of City Planning, with Google Earth as a reference. We digitally modeled the educational institutions, religious complexes, retail corridor, and other essential buildings along the route, and populated the digital twin with key objects including stop signs, light poles, fire hydrants, and trash cans. With a dynamic environment system, water level animations, fish flocking, and floating objects, we were able to visually narrate 9 climate change scenarios immersively to the participants.
So I wanted to kind of contextualize when we did the study of this system that we built. We had groups that were recruited from Roosevelt Island. We put it in the local grocery markets and in local cafes. And so we had pre-ride focus groups of up to 12 people. We were asking them, what they think about climate change, what their concerns are with flooding. We had everyone ride this bus. And then we also ran another focus group after. And what we found is, people are from New York, they're kind of lefty, they said they recycled cans, they care about climate change, but in the pre-ride things, the thoughts are very abstract. They kind of have opinions that were really general. And in the post-ride focus group, everyone is much more nervous, but their concerns are also much more specific. What if a flood happens during the school day? How will parents actually pick up the children? There's a senior citizen center. What happens to the people in the senior citizen center? Who works there? What's going on? And so we think that basically having everyone in the community have a chance to have a common shared experience of what might happen, different possible futures, makes it possible to have these conversations about what are concrete things the community needs to do to plan for possible futures. And I think this is maybe the most exciting aspect of the research that we've been doing in this space, like this ability to give people the shared experience is a kind of foreground for this other really important community social work that needs to happen. So takeaway from this last thread is that simulation is a great way to understand these real reactions to potential futures, and that the shared experiences pave the way for understanding interaction, but also generating kind of resolve for action. And again, this is a kind of repeated theme, like low cost, easily replicable methods and data sharing make it possible to for us to appreciate the depth and breadth of the things you have to do to understand community level differences, which are huge. And then we are sharing our digital models. We hope other people will be excited about doing these things. I think we could do cool projects where we have digital cities, different cities, but running the same infrastructure underneath, and then do comparisons. I'm going to close up with thinking about what HCI brings to urban contexts. I think there's just an appreciation that HCI folks have for the on-the-ground, in-person, everyday experience that people who work on urban planning don't always have. There's also just a willingness to invent new tools to get a handle on age-old problems. And I think the number of times we've participated in conversations where people were really surprised to find there are doorways to other possible worlds when they are so used to trying to optimize and work with the same trade-offs. It's really exciting. And then finally, I think there's just this determination in HCI to solve problems, but with people. And I think that's something that I've really enjoyed doing in New York City, and I think is a thing that you can think about that we as HCI people bring to problems. And with that, I'll close up. I will mention my new department, Design Tech, has a search. It literally went up on AJO yesterday. I think it might get approval to be public soon. But if you know people who are working at interaction design with cutting edge technologies, we are going to be hiring. Thanks.
All right, we have a few minutes for questions, comments, thoughts.
There's a question there.
Thank you, Professor Wendy. I have a question regarding the first project, the robot one.
Robot one? Okay.
Yeah. Because we saw the video, different people with different personalities probably have different reaction to new kind of stuff happening in the real world. So I'm wondering, in general, how your team initially designed this study, especially for the robot side. Do you guys preset some default setting for the robot? Also, do your team have any expectation as a before for the people, different people with different personality? And do you have any expectation, or you just let the robot to behave in the real world? Also, another question is for the robot side, are you guys monitoring the camera with in the real time?
Yeah, those are great questions. So the question is, in the trash barrel robot study, are we doing things to kind of control the robot's behavior, kind of the personality the robot exhibits? And I will say, well, we have wizards, but like human teleoperators who are controlling the robots. We have those people we set them up with line of sight to the robots. And that's because actually at Stanford, there were a bunch of situations where non-line of sight created dramatic tensions that didn't necessarily need to be there. And they can see the footage real time, but because they have line of sight, they are very often relying on the line of sight and like only looking down if they're too far away to see the action. From a personality perspective, every wizard drives differently. One of the funny things is I can tell from the footage which of the researchers is driving the robot, So there is definitely a personality there, but we didn't control for it. The wizards were given a high level mission to go and collect garbage, like behave in a socially appropriate manner, whatever that means. And then we let a lot of things happen, by happenstance. We do nothing to control the personality of people. I don't totally know how to typify that. These are very incidental interactions. So I'm sure personality is an interesting question, but I think it's not one at the urban scale that we can get at. I think we can think about it as like different kinds of interactions you have with people, and they might just be having a bad day. It might not be a personality thing, but I think we characterize these at an interaction level. Yeah.
Like when people do studies with like bulky items or something that's eye-catching, like how do you set it up? Was there not like a small crowd of people that maybe like came over to like see what you were doing when you're like setting the trash cans down or like attaching the or getting the driver set up or anything like that? Like did no one notice what you were doing?
Yeah. So the question is like, do people notice what we're doing? Like is there things where like the backstage work is kind of like being pulled forward. And I will say like the setup is pretty elegant. Like we mostly have to attach, like the computer is underneath the trash sack, like inside the trash barrel, or sometimes some parts of it are in the base, and we just have to screw the trash barrel onto the base. So it's not a lot of work setting up, but sometimes people see that. We have a few recordings of people having conversations with the wizards, and the wizards are just trying to focus on their job, and like people are like asking all sorts of questions about robotics, research. And I think in a public setting, you have to mark that those things happen, but you can't control for them. So I think we know that it's like these are imperfect and kind of noisy. And the things that you get from a tightly controlled lab study, you are not going to get, and we don't expect ourselves to get in this environment. So the strings are showing. There's been some recent research that shows that people who understand that they're in a Wizard of Oz study don't behave differently than people who don't know. And I think that has also been my gut feeling. But I think we just try in our research to acknowledge that this kind of leakage happens. Yeah.
Thank you for this talk. It was really interesting. I was wondering, so you said that we can learn a lot from these by observing these kinds of interactions that the people have with the robot trash can particularly. And I was just curious, like, in the spirit of kind of learning from these interactions, when people are like talking to the robot and say, oh, it's learning, and having these various types of communications with what they know is an inanimate object, like what kinds of functions do you think that's serving like in their mind? Like what are they trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Do you have a sense for like the kinds of motivations that people have?
Yeah, and so I'm in the very early stages of working on a book on social competence. And I think that people have an investment in the way that things are supposed to work. And in New York, you kind of see this because the locals are always yelling instructions, helpful suggestions to tourists. Like the number of times I've seen people like literally grab a person and say like, you can't stop in the middle of the road to take pictures. I think it's kind of cool. It might feel rude in the moment, but what's going on is the people who are there trying to explain like norms, and pragmatics that might not be obvious to newcomers. And I think that the things that we're seeing in the interactions with the robots are similar, right? There is a local culture and there's a way the culture works the way it does. And anything that mucks with it, interferes with your day is a threat to the local culture. And so people who are locals have all sorts of motivations to explain and enforce the norms. And I think it's interesting that people do this with other people, with small children, with animals, with robots. And, that's why I think it's interesting. I have a collection of people talking to robots, but I think it's a thing that we have been doing, animals have been doing to pragmatically coexist in this space without too much interaction. And I think we don't think about it because it is not even like this like prefrontal cortex intellectual activity that like Homo sapiens do. I think this is a negotiation that animals have to do. And so I think people are very good at doing this, to the point they never think about it. And the desire to like enforce the culture and like stick to the norms is there. And this is why technologies that just voice themselves into the space and say like, everyone's going to adapt to us now. Like this is why people are coming out with the rocks and the, sticks. Yeah. This is a hypothesis, not proven. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I was struck in the original footage there about how much people treat it like a dog.
Yeah.
Dogs go, they fetch things, they consume them, all those things. And so it raised the question of, well, should our next batch of robots be friendly dogs? And then I thought, how much is that because the task is fit to that? Yeah. What if, for example, you had robots that you built like this who are out doing crowd control?
Yeah.
Instead of fetching trash. How would people react differently to them?
Another thing that wasn't in our control is what were the other robots in the city at the time? And 2022 was the year that Boston Dynamics decided to do a whole engagement with the NYPD with the robot dogs. And so policing, like robots policing the cities was kind of a theme that we couldn't escape from. And people hated these dogs with just a blinding white hot passion. And there's a lot of like kicking, and like people like, fantasizing about setting the dogs on fire. And then meanwhile, our trash barrel is being treated like this friendly dog. People are blowing kisses at it, saying good boy. And so it's super interesting because there's a literal machine that is shaped like a dog and meant to evoke the dog metaphor. And people treat it like they were police because regardless of form factor, that's the institution that they belong to. And they were very aware of that. And meanwhile, our robot was treated like a dog, even though it looks like a garbage can. It doesn't make sense to blow kisses at a garbage can. So I think a lot of it has to do with that. Like people, it turns out in the city, are super aware of the framing. When they're asking about the framing, like what is the context under which this thing is here? I don't know why that goes to dog, but I do think there's a match between like the activities. But I also think it has a lot to do with that frame, like that it is trying to perform a friendly service and not totally competent at doing it. But we haven't varied it enough to really dig under that. And we haven't seen a lot of alternatives to the dog metaphor that people go to speculate about other things, although in a controlled lab study that would be fun to play with. Yeah.
A riff on that. A lot of the sort of theme of this is like, we can use these Wizard of Oz robotic prototypes to project into what might things look like when we have full automation or something like that. And I want to question that for a moment, because I feel like you look at what Disney Imagineers do at Disneyland or whatever, where they've got people in the Stormtrooper outfits where they're using gestures to control a wide vocabulary of whatever the Stormtroopers are saying or something like that. It seems like there is a world in which we're going to have almost like cyborg robotics, where it's like part human, part robot. Okay. Where it's kind of being puppeteered slightly to have superhuman or confusingly human characteristics. I'm just curious if you think that is like a design space that's interesting, that is a future that you think we ought to be pushing toward, or you feel like this is more informative of like sort of full automation down the road?
The cyborg future versus the non-anthropomorphic future, is that the thing you're asking about? Or?
if I understand your claim correctly, even the full automation future is going to be anthropomorphized, right? We can't escape that.
People are social, right? Like,
yeah. Right. So I agree with that.
There's no way to interact.
But I also don't feel like it has to be the case that things are fully autonomous anthropomorphized.
No, I don't think things need to be fully autonomous either. And like, I think that's one of there's this really lovely book, Ghost Work, about the way that like it's really people behind a lot of the machines. I don't like, and a lot of the vehicles that are automated, like in San Francisco, actually they have fleet drivers somewhere else involved. Yeah, I think that's part of the future. I think for me, a little bit, what I'm learning from, being on the ground and like working with people, interviewing people, is they don't ask the question of what's behind this. They care less about how it's really working, and they care more about who's it for. Like the fact that like the autonomous cars are Waymo cars, and then there could be other cars that are like SFPD cars, that matters more to people than like where is the brain for the system hiding? And that's just like an interesting thing. I do think that one of the things is a conundrum for us is that our work looks a lot like entertainment and theater, spectacle. And what we're trying to do is slightly different. If it's anything, it's like a community improv. Like we are very much trying to elicit the reactions. We're very interested in what people say to us during and afterward. And that's really different than having an audience. And so I think some of the framing around that is something that we're always working on, like what is the right way to do that in a way that makes sense. It's interesting, I think, there's a bunch of people in HCI. You guys will have all these different kinds of people. There's a lot of people who see a problem, fix a problem, they're problem solvers, bottom up. I also think there are people who like to look at things more as planners, and look at the big picture and try to like say how you organize the small on the ground activities. Theorists, Terry used to say there's these bottom up, top down people, and he thinks of them as top up, the visionaries. And I think of myself a little bit more as an inside out person. I'm really questioning the way that we do design, how we could do it differently, and how that would change, what we can do, what we're interested in. So I'm always fixated on the methodology, and I think it's a lot about like, how can we get more people into this?
I think we're about at time, so Wendy will hang for a couple minutes,
Yeah.
but let's thank our speaker one more time.